There's a center of all this is speed and safety. But hey, so of course there are different types of issues. So what do you think about it? It's not quite barrier.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. All right, hello everybody. If you can hear my hands, or sorry, if you can hear my voice, good way to start. So hello everybody, my name's Adrian Wren. I'm a project manager with Valley Vision. I'm also the manager of the Cleaner Air Partnership, or CAP as we like to call it. So who here has heard of the Cleaner Air Partnership? Raise your hand please. Good, folks are familiar. That's great. So we're really excited that there's so many folks here today to learn about our work to improve air quality across the Sacramento region, and amazed that you guys have not chosen to go to Burning Man instead coming to this luncheon today. So thank you. So for history's sake, the Cleaner Air Partnership was created over 30 years ago by the Sacramento Metro Chamber and Breathe California Sacramento region. Currently, the coalition that makes up the Cleaner Air Partnership is composed of business leaders, public health officials, environmental advocates, and the Sacramento region's 5 air quality management districts, all working together to advocate for cleaner air across the region. So a big thank you to our generous contributors. So in the room we have the Sac Metro Air District, we have SMUD, we have Sutter Health, Union Pacific, and the Sacramento Association of Realtors. Let's give them a round of applause. We also are happy to be hosted by the Sacramento Regional Builders Exchange, SRBX. They have a really awesome space today. Valley Vision works with them on a lot of our workforce work, and of course, them being the oldest sort of developers association in the region, a lot of the work they do is very relevant to the air quality world. So let's give them a round as well. We also have some elected officials with us. So you can hold your applause, but I'd like to recognize Supervisor Veerkamp of El Dorado County. I'd like to recognize Philip Norton with the Congressman Amibera's office. Glenda Corcoran over there with the Office of Congresswoman Doris Matsui. We also have Tara Thronson, my old boss, and former manager of the Cleaner Air Partnership, in fact, here as Deputy to Yolo County Supervisor Don Saylor. We also have a couple guests from Senator Kamala Harris's office, Nathan Yanez and Samantha Maciel over at that table. So thank you all for being here. Quick housekeeping. I hope everybody got the memo that you're supposed to park on Elvis Avenue. I know, it's not super intuitive, but they are apparently very proactive with towing. So try not to park in like the lot that immediately surrounds this building. We also try to be super zero waste, or as nearly so, here at the Cleaner Air Partnership. So you have, a number of paper plates and breads and vegetables as part of your sandwiches. So please be sure there's an orange compost bin or an orange sign that points you toward a compost bin. So try to put your vegetables and breads and paper plates in there. No meats, no cheeses, please. And then we also have these nice metal forks, so please don't throw them away. I want to reuse them. There should be like under that other orange sign is a fork drop off. And then finally, bathrooms are around to my left, your right. Behind the wall. So we have an exciting program today. Before diving in, I'd like to do a quick round of introductions. So if folks know? Okay. All right, I won't. So I don't know if we want to use the mic. Maybe we should. If you could just give your name and your organization, we'll do it like a lightning round if that's cool. So Adrian Wren with Valley Vision.
All right, just a mic. Laura Papiak, Uptown Studios.
Patrick Guild with Breathe California Sacramento region. Jennifer Benton with Free California, Sacramento Region.
Tara Thronson with Yolo County Supervisor Don Saylor's office.
Thank you.
Meg Arnold with Valley Vision.
Paul Adams, Free California, and Catastrophic Radio.
Renee DeVere Oki, SACOG.
David Shabazian, SACOG.
Thank you.
John Lane with Tykert.
Jim Alves with SMUD.
Grace Kaufman with LGC.
Renee Toledo with SMUD. John Melvin with CAL FIRE.
Matthew Reischman with CAL FIRE.
Evan Johnson, Office of Planning and Research.
Bree Taylor, County Department of Airports.
Paul Philly, Sac Metro Air Quality.
Laura Fisher with SMUD.
Susan Rainier, AIA Committee for the Environment Chair.
Kaylani Panetta, Sutter Health. Erin Teague, Sacramento Association of Realtors. Terry Duarte, Sac Metro Air District.
Roberto Ayala, Sac Metro Community. I'm Rafa Proper, I'm with Ecos and Breathe California.
Lynn Goldsmith with Ecos and 350 Sacramento.
Sue Teranishi, board member of Breathe California and Sacramento Area Bicycle Advocates.
Earl Withercombe, Breathe California and Ecos.
Keith Carney, Sustainable Transportation Solutions, that's electric vehicles.
Pat Shelby with, you'll hear from me later.
Janice Lamp-Snyder with the Sacramento Air Quality District. Amy Roberts, Sac Metro Air District.
Bill Mueller with Valley Vision and also a board member of Breathe California.
Matt Earhart, Eros Mom Air Quality.
Eric Mott with Placer County Air District.
Tom Boston, Placer County Air District. Brian Veerkamp, Elderly County Board of Supervisors.
Tamara Johnston, Georgetown Divide Fire Safe Council.
Hannah Moore, UC Davis Continuing and Professional Education.
Monica Jackson, UC Davis.
Philip Norton, Office of Congressman Ami Berra.
Bailey Smith with the Air Resources Board.
Alan Jean Granicus.
Bill Dean, California Environmental Protection Agency.
Teresa Nantor, Naval Works Sacramento.
Andrew Kehoe, Office of Mayor Darrell Steinberg.
Linda Corcoran, Office of Congressman Matsui.
Brooklyn Saylor, Stantec Consulting.
Nathan Nunez, Office of U.S. Senator Harris.
Awesome, thank you all. Just a couple folks that I also want to recognize. Dave Johnson walked in. Thank you, Dave, for carpooling with Supervisor Veerkamp to save our air quality, right? And also I saw Mark Ladsenheiser with Sac Metro Air District walk in. And finally, Emma Kofed in the back and Isabel Dela Cruz are my colleagues at Valley Vision who made all this possible. So please give them a nice round of applause. So without further ado, I'd like to invite up Janice Lamb-Snyder and Pat Shelby, if you'd like, to talk about AB 617 and some of the community work that's going on in South Sacramento around air quality. So here goes. And here's the clicker.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Janice Lamp-Snyder. I am a program manager at the Sac Metro Air District, overseeing air monitoring, federal and state planning and data analysis. Also the policy and technical lead for the community air monitoring plan for the community air protection program. I am here with Patricia Shelby, and I'll introduce her in a little bit. She's our vice chair for the South Sacramento Steering Committee. So I'm just going to give two quick background slides. I was here December of last year, so just a little bit about the program. Historically, air districts have been focused on regional air quality, right? And so we've made lots of significant improvements throughout California, throughout the nation. And AB 617, which was adopted in 2017, really wanted us to focus on community level air quality and reducing risk and improving public health in our communities, especially in our most vulnerable and disadvantaged communities. The key to AB 617 is really a community-led effort. And so, they stressed a lot about, ensuring that we're meeting community objectives and what their wants and needs are. And so, so that is all encompassing in 617. In addition to that, this is a mechanism for us to bring some of the cap and trade funding into our communities to reduce these localized emissions. So there are 6 key components to 617. There's an air monitoring component, there's emission reduction plans, there is a clearinghouse for clean technology. It's ensuring that we're putting some of the cleanest technologies, or expediting clean technologies into some of the large sectors. And then there's enhanced emission reporting and increased penalty provisions for violators. In addition to that, at the end of our presentation, I'm also going to touch on incentive funding. So the Sacramento Air District recommended 10 communities to the state to be a part of AB 617. And then South Sacramento was selected to be one of 10 across the state to be a part of the program. And you can see here is the South Sacramento-Florin community, and that's the boundaries to that. So I'm going to introduce Pat. She is our vice chair for the South Sacramento-Florin Steering Committee. We put together a community so that we could have an avenue to hear community input and feedback and to help lead the effort. So here's Pat.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is, I go by Pat, and my name is Patricia Shelby. I am a resident of South Sacramento, close to 40 years. So I am a mother of 5 beautiful daughters. I am a grandmother to 9 beautiful children. The 2-month-old, there's nothing on my clothing, I was birthing him this morning. Okay, I am a retiree. I retired a little bit early because my asthma became so bad here in this area. I was having lung collapses. And I and my doctors thought that I would die. And I thought, well, I love my job, but I love my life a little better. And I love my family, so what is it that I can do? So I was able to get things a little bit better put together for myself, and some strategic plans to get me out of town periodically to some better air. And I really started looking around, what can I do in my community to help with what's going on, because each one of my children started to suffer from asthma. Now you have to understand, we're a non-smoking family. And then last year my mother died of cancer. Never smoked a day in her life. So this got real scary and real personal. So looking for something that I could participate in and make a difference for myself, my children, my grandchildren, my neighbors, my community. And this came up. And I guess I have been complaining about it enough that my elected official decided, well, why don't you go try this committee? So that's how I got here. Okay. Our committee was put together as part of the AB 617 to try to get that community input. Now, we developed a charter. We selected community boundaries. We had a little bit of arguing about how big, how small, how expansive, that we could really be able to manage in this time. We also made a commitment, each one of us, that we would serve a minimum of 12 months, and then looked to see if we were going to continue, and as we were going along, how we could bring more people in from the community to participate in the committee. We prioritized our monitoring objectives and the areas. We also created a community tour. We took a little bus tour around to see what some of the areas and to hear from each one of us what we thought were some of the most impacted components and sensitive areas in our community, sensitive populations. We have a lot of young children, we have a lot of seniors. We also had to make a commitment what our steering committee roles were in developing of that. And with that, how you can come to bring 12 people together who are trying to all learn, what some of you have gone to school to become professionals about air quality and how we're supposed to learn this, meeting once a month. It's been like drinking a tank of water every meeting. There's so much to learn. But we've been serious about it. We've been reading our documents, we've been participating, but that's part of what we've done. We expanded the initial community boundaries. You'll see the dotted line on the interior of the purple. That was the first recommended area. We had some recommendations of how to push it a little further northwest and to the east of us because we knew of sensitive populations that we wanted to incorporate in this area. We did that by having a series of, we broke up into groups, we talked about our concerns, our priorities, and we came up with 3 different maps, and then we combined and came up ultimately with our final map. All right, so some of our concerns, we were, of course, talking about how do we make ourselves aware and what can we do through better understanding with air quality. How can we identify where we wanted to initiate our monitoring at a community level. And wanted to know who's most affected and how we can effectively meet their needs initially, okay, in those sensitive locations. And to determine where we can the source of the emissions that were causing the most problems. Okay. The maps that we talked about, we had identified here to the left some of the most sensitive areas that we knew about. The map in the center, we really prioritized, and you can see in the colors, the, I don't even know what that color is, tan, beige, purple. We prioritized the yellowish tan was our first priority. And because of that area, we were concerned. We have high levels of truck emissions and children walking through those. We have a lot of schools and a lot of senior care facilities in that area. Our second area was the blue area just to the south in the middle, located along the 99 corridor, Kazunas Boulevard, Power Inn, and is the major walkway for children going to and from elementary schools and junior high, high school, and or walking and having to walk through those large plumes. And then our purple area to the right, and then our green to the south. We thought that the green area likely has some of the least amount of impacts, and really are going to use that as a monitoring area to do some comparison to some of the other areas that we're looking at. I won't talk about the last one. Too many dots. All right, the bus tour that I told you about, these were the locations that we went through, and schools, hospitals, residential communities that are highly impacted by truck routes cut through our community, and just also areas we thought would perhaps be significant monitoring opportunities. All right, so Janice is going to talk to you about the monitoring programs and the strategy that we're going to do. And I just want to end by saying this is supposed to be a community effort and community input, but we also can't do it. We have our own personal opinions. Each one of us, each one of the members has our own personal opinion, but we also need some science and we also need some data. And that's the goal of the monitoring, to help us be able to identify and either back up some of our concerns or to say, no, that's not really the concern. The bigger concern is this. So we're trying to get that data. We are hoping, and my desire, is that we come up with something that's tangible, that we really have tangible evidence and we come up with partnerships. That's why I'm glad to be here today, because it's going to take those linkages and those partnerships for us to be able to effectively address our elected officials, our CARB board, the state legislature, with what is really happening at community levels. The 10 communities selected across the state are all very different. We don't have a port that's significant that we're worried about. We don't have a chrome plating facility that hits us in this region. But other areas do. We're not being crop dusted as other communities are. But it still is significant, and that we need to have at this community level, and the community has to know so that they can effectively be that back in that wind and that sail for all of you who are trying to make our lives safer and the future safer by managing the quality of our air. And we thank you so much for your effort. And please join us as we are meeting as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. So we've been on this journey with the steering committee members for about 8 months. And you've seen from Pat about all the different exercises that we went through in order to really get to what the concerns are of the community. And so how do then we translate that information into the science, right? How do we prove that in a sense? And so what we have to do, or what we are required to do, is to develop a community air monitoring plan. And what that is, it's a blueprint of laying out where are we going to monitor, how are we going to monitor it for it, and what do we expect the information that we're going to get, and how it's going to help us make decisions in the future. And so the district is in the process of developing the monitoring plan. We likely will be having a draft out sometime in the next couple months or so. And then we really adopted a 3-phase strategy. And there's a couple of reasons for that. And I'll walk through the 3-phase strategy in a little bit. But so with that, we are currently working on deploying our first phase of monitors and procurement of some of the instruments that we will be using as part of this monitoring effort. So here's the monitoring strategy. Phase 1 really is an initial screening phase. And so what we want to do is to be able to deploy these new technologies, these new advanced technologies, in saturating an area, ultimately. And once we are able to do that, then we can move into the phase 2, which is, okay, you have these sensors out, they're not the most accurate, but they tell us some information about spatial variation. Is it high here, is it low here? Where should we focus? And then once we have that information, we can bring in some more sophisticated monitoring equipment where we're really trying to understand the toxic chemicals, and then deploy those in a subset of those areas. And once we do that, we're going to bring in a portable trailer with the whole suite of air monitoring sensors to really get down to what are the source categories that are impacting this community in South Sacramento. So phase one, we're currently in that right now. We have deployed 4 low-cost sensors in our South Sacramento community. We have been working to deploy 18 more. The challenge here now is that sensors have really kind of taken over. A lot of people are interested in this now. And so the sensor manufacturers are having a difficult time keeping up with the production. And so we're slightly delayed because of the procurement in order to get some of these sensors back on hand. We've been working with schools to secure locations, and what you see on the map here are the locations in which we either have deployed, so the green is where we've deployed already, which is in the first priority area that the steering committee identified, and then the other areas in which we have secured locations for, and then also potential locations that we're going to be, we're still trying to see if that's an area in which we can secure a location. So phase 2, like I said, is doing a deeper dive into the toxics. And so the goal is to be able to take measurements of toxic chemicals, speciated particulate matter, as well as black carbon. And the goal is to get some of these equipment up by winter of 2019. And like I said, this is really to help, and the areas in which, I don't know if you can see, the hash areas are the areas in which we're looking at putting the enhanced or phase 2 monitors at. And the reason why we don't really have any particular point like I did in the last slide is because these phase 2 is likely going to take a bigger footprint, and so we would really have to work with areas. We won't know exactly where that area is until we're because it does take a larger footprint. And then phase 3 is deploying a portable trailer platform, and that's scheduled to deploy in early 2020. And so we're in the monitors that we know that we will need to monitor for is particulate matter, nitrogen oxides, specific toxics, collecting meteorological information, and then we're still exploring some additional pollutants that can fit in there. And really the challenge here is that this isn't a full blown out station where you have lots of space. So the challenge is trying to fit all this equipment. How much equipment can you fit in this smaller trailer that you're used to having double the size? So like I mentioned, we have currently 4 sensors up in the South Sacramento community. This information is on our website right now. It's at the Bowling Green Park, Nicholas Park. We have one at the Sheriff's Center as well as the Mac Road partnership. So all that information is on our website if you're interested.
Janice, what kind of sensors are you guys using?
We are using clarity sensors right now. And the reason why we're using clarities is partly because of logistics, really. When we went out and spoke with the schools, they had lots of reservations in terms of, because it has a power cord, and so they were very concerned that if they had any exposed power cords. And so, because the kids could get up there and there'd be a dangerous situation, and even on the roof they had that issue. So the clarities actually gave us. They have their own internet, because internet was also a big issue as well, because their internet was so sophisticated that we couldn't get through it. And so with these, they were more standalone. They had solar panels on there, so it didn't require any physical power outlet. So that's the air monitoring portion of it, updates. We're also working very hard on other elements that I discussed earlier in the presentation for AB 617. We're currently trying to develop a community level emission inventory for South Sacramento. We're also updating penalty provisions to meet the AB 617 mandates. That's going to our board in September. And we're also enhanced our enforcement to identify any unpermitted sources in that area. Adrian? I'm almost done. And then as a parallel effort to the monitoring effort, we are also looking at, we also have been working really hard on the community air protection incentives. And this is really important to the program because it doesn't wait until the data comes in a year later. It's getting emissions now, hopefully now or soon. And the Sacramento and Yolo County collectively got 14 million. If you want to know the breakout, is 13 million Sacramento, 1 million in Yolo County. And the priority is going to be in the South Sacramento-Florin area, even though in South Sacramento-Florin community. But there are the other areas in our county that we're also going to be, that can also receive the incentives, which is the other 9 identified communities that the district had. And also, you know, DACs and low income are going to be a priority for us. What the community, when we first went out talking about incentives, we were asking what are the community's values in terms of, or priorities, you know, and what we heard back was that trucks, buses, light duty was something that the community was really interested in putting these incentive dollars to. So I have a list of focuses on there in terms of, you know, trucks, medium heavy duty, the medium heavy duty equipment, as well as electric vehicle infrastructure and transit buses. We're also looking at reducing air pollutions in schools, and that's in development right now. And that can, you know, include potential filters or EV school buses. And also stationary sources and then incentive program is also in development right now. What I do want to bring your attention to is that there is going to be a solicitation for projects that's coming out on October. That's going to be on our website, and that's focused on the programs that we have right now, which is the Prop 1B for trucks as well as for school buses. Our next steering committee meeting is in September, and that's going to be on September 24th between 6 and 8 p.m. You're all invited, I'm personally inviting you, to join us in this conversation. And it's going to be at the Florin Creek Recreational Center. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me, and I can put you in contact with the right people if it's not me.
Awesome, thank you. So I think we have time for one really good question. So I see, oh, and actually I wanted to recognize that SMUD board director Brandon Rose walked in. So welcome, Brandon. I think Sue Teranishi actually had her hand up, sorry. And here, I'll bring you the mic so you don't have to project. Here you are.
Well, I have maybe a stupid question, but it said you're measuring particulates, and I was thinking that we're non-attainment for ozone. So is there no measurement of ozone in this project?
You could start all by all.
Okay, I can probably talk about it enough. No, so we are going to be measuring for NOx emissions, and so we're going to be measuring for NOx emissions as well as VOCs. So for those who may not know, NOx in combination, nitrogen oxides with combination of VOCs mixed in with sunlight, cooked in with sunlight, creates ozone. And so as you're effectively reducing or monitoring for the NOx emissions, then you'll be able to connect with ozone. Does that answer your question?
And then Brandon, you want to holler?
Those are precursors to ozone.
I'll try to ask that. I think it's a good question though. If trucks are the perceived problem, does the local air district have the ability to enforce the different truck routes? And how can they get that ability if they don't?
So I think this is where the incentives can come in. And so, you know, the ARB has the authority for mobile sources, but we do have the ability to create innovative programs that can equally, if not, reduce these NOx emissions from trucks.
Sorry.
I was just going to mention there are rules at ARB that local air districts can enforce, such as the idling rule. So sometimes we do get complaints or some vehicles, we can enforce them. So those are some of the activities we can do.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. So next, I would love to bring up Meg Arnold, who's a project leader at Valley Vision, who's going to moderate the next session on wildfires.
We have to say wildfire like that every time we mention it. Actually, let's not. So hi, thanks. Really good to get an 8617 update, and that's really important work that's being done. And Pat, there you are. I really appreciate you being here today on behalf of yourself and the steering committee. So we're going to turn up to the next topic, which is out of wildfire, and I'd like to ask our panelists to come up and join me up here. We're going to run this as a slightly modestly informal sort of conversation amongst the panelists, and obviously this is a really impactful topic across the state. We've seen, as we all know, unprecedented devastation, unprecedented burned acreage, unprecedented losses of property and life, driven by decades of forest management practices, driven by drought, driven by pest and beetle infestation. I think we're up to 150 million dead and dying trees, if not more, across the state. And we don't need to belabor all of the things that happened in the last couple of years, both in our part of the state and in the southern part of the state as well. So I'm really pleased to have with us today two representatives from CAL FIRE, John Melvin, with the Resource Protection and Improvement section of CAL FIRE, and Matthew Reischman, who is Assistant Deputy Director of CAL FIRE. We're also joined by Supervisor Brian Veerkamp from El Dorado County, himself a former firefighter, and by Evan Johnson, who is the Climate Policy Advisor in the Office of Planning and Research and was the lead staff on the Commission on Catastrophic Wildfire Costs and Recovery that was launched and has already concluded its work in the first 7 or so months of 2019. So my job here today is to ask each of these folks I've just introduced an introductory opening question, and then I'm going to have some time for follow-up after we've heard from everybody, and then it will really be open to questions from all of you here today. So that's how we're going to run it, and we're going to pass the mic and do good sharing of the microphone. So I think I'd like to start with the two of you from CAL FIRE, and you let me know who's going to go first. As I expect we all know, at the beginning of the year, Governor Newsom set a really good timetable to identify fire prevention priorities across the state, and that resulted in a list of 35. And so I'd like to just ask if you guys can bring us up to date on how those 35 are moving forward, as well as any other updates that you'd like to share with us about CAL FIRE's other activities in fire prevention.
Good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Matthew Reischman with CAL FIRE.
definitely.
And yeah, I'd be happy to talk a little bit about the 35 projects, but before I thought it would be interesting, I find it fascinating to provide you with a few statistics on where we are right now with fire season in comparison to last year. So these stats are from January 1 up through Monday. And so across the state, within state responsibility area, which is the CAL FIRE's jurisdiction, largely outside of unincorporated cities, we've had 3,500 fires. If you include the federal fires on federal lands, they've had 720 for a total fire count across the state this year so far of about 4,200 fires. Comparison to last year, we had on average across the state up to this point, we had about 5,300 fires. So a similar amount of fire starts, if you will. But here's the change. This year, if you look at the number of acres that have burned across the state, within state responsibility, we've had 27,000 acres have burned. On federal land, they've had 28,000 acres for a total state count of about 55,000 acres. Now, when you compare that to where we were last year, so that's 55,000 compared to 1.2 million. So the number of acres that have burned this season is way down. So we're very, very fortunate, very thankful for that. Our goal is to keep 95% of our fires at 10 acres or less, and we do whatever we can to do that. But I think the big difference this year is we haven't had the red flag, we haven't had the wind, we haven't had the humidities down in the single digits to the extent we have, but not to the extent that we have last year at this time. So we're knocking on wood and we're keeping our fingers crossed. We're not out of the clear. This time of year is really when our fuels get into the conditions where they're at most critical and most receptive for combustion. So until we have any wetting rain, we're gonna stay on high alert and be ready to go. But I thought that was pretty interesting statistics. But so yeah, the 35 projects. We Governor Newsom, when he came into office in January, provided us with pretty clear direction on an interest to ramp up the pace and scale for fire prevention and forest health activities across the state. He specifically wanted us to look at vulnerable communities, areas that kind of reflected the demographic of the campfire, and he wanted us to implement fuel reduction efforts around these communities. So through our fire planning process that we use, we annually identify projects. We're continually doing that, so we have a cache of projects at any given time that we're either in some stage of permitting or implementing constantly year round. And so we had those projects already keyed up. Governor was interested in providing some environmental relief, CEQA suspension, California Environmental Quality Act suspension, and so we worked with the resource agency and the other water quality, fish and wildlife, some of the other resource agencies to ensure that even though we were suspending some of the CEQA requirements, we still implemented those projects very consistently with the way we would had we gone through the CEQA process. So the best management practices that we were using on those projects, and we are using and will continue to use to address archaeology and wildlife and water quality impacts, we're implementing those PNPs as if we would on any other project. And so we started, we also received some contracting relief, and we started activities on those projects right away. And to date, we are, we're attacking them. We're about, I don't want to say 50%. We're probably, 50 to 60, but we're still out there every day, 7 days a week, committed to those. There's a lot of challenges that we're dealing with in regard to, operating in right-of-ways, and there's just a whole slew of hurdles that come with implementing that amount of projects across the state. But we've had a lot of support from the governor's office and the other agencies in the state. And it's not just CAL FIRE, it's all the state agencies stepping up together and collectively making an effort to get this done. And we're working locally with the counties and the cities, and things are going very, very well. We're making a lot of progress, and we'll continue to be committed to these for the next several months, and then probably on into the future beyond that. So we were glad to have it's been a lot of work, it's been a heavy lift, but we were glad to have the opportunity and the support, and we look forward to continuing on with that effort.
Yeah, I thought I'd just talk a little bit about what some of the challenges have been. So despite a CEQA waiver, that doesn't relieve you of all environmental review responsibility. There's a lot of other laws, both state and federal, that you still have to comply with. So that's one of the reasons we're going through our normal processes, is to make sure that we're addressing all of those concerns while expediting projects. And part of that was the process involved in actually generating the 45-day report, surveying partnering organizations throughout the state on their thoughts, and then incorporating that into the report. And so that helped us a lot when it came time to implement 35 projects. Folks were rightfully concerned, hey, why are we going through this process to waive CEQA? And so by the time that happened, we had meetings with concerned organizations, and we feel like we allayed some of their fears, and we've had a lot of support going forward. So some ideas of challenges. One is, a lot of these projects, being that they are near communities at risk, there's a lot of landowners involved. And every landowner has to give permission. We can't just go do work on people's property. And so we have one project in particular where there was 139 landowners. So that takes time, especially absentee landowners. So that's a big hurdle. Lack of contractors. There's a lot of work going on out there, from grants, local efforts, utility companies. So getting contractors that can do this kind of work is difficult right now. That has led to some necessary increase in costs too, to be able to get contractors. And then the other part of this is we have been able to take advantage of California National Guard crews, our 10 fuels reduction crews that are our recent budget enhancements from the last couple of years. And then on some of these projects, we're actually working with CARB, and we're doing both air quality and fuels monitoring before and during prescribed burns. We're doing that on on a lot of our prescribed burns, not just with these projects, but in places where we're burning and there's a good opportunity, they're setting up monitors in nearby communities to see what is the impact on air quality. We have a lot of anecdotal information, but we don't know the real story, so we're gathering that data. The idea being, of course, we can treat a lot of acres with prescribed fire, knowing there's an impact. But it's a known impact at a known time where we can warn people, as opposed to the alternative, which is catastrophic wildfire, where everybody's impacted for a longer period of time at an unknown time and date. So those are some of the challenges we've been running into, and hopefully we'll be able to answer some questions if you have them.
So, Evan, I'd like to turn to you and your role at OPR and your role with the Commission on Catastrophic Wildfire Cost and Recovery. That also kicked off at the beginning of the year, and now that work has concluded with some output and some recommendations, maybe you can bring us up to date on what those were, and then what you see as the next steps that have gotten underway, and where you think those will lead.
Sure, thanks Megan, thanks for the invite to be here, appreciate it. I can give just a 30-second background on SB 901 and the commission itself, and then talk a little bit about what was in the report and what we've seen in legislation since then. Everybody's familiar with the fact that we had catastrophic wildfire seasons in 2017, 2018, and a number of those wildfires were at least perceived, were in fact, and also were perceived to be instigated by utilities in the state. And so as a result, the legislature acted pretty swiftly to pass SB 901, which was meant to address the intersection of utilities and wildfires to ensure that there was a greater focus at the Public Utilities Commission and in the state on addressing utility-started wildfires, while also addressing the concern that the utilities had started to be financially unstable to a degree because there was liability associated with wildfires, those massive wildfires, and were finding it increasingly difficult to get capital to make improvements or get insurance for that liability. So SB 901 was passed to address portions of that and make requirements on wildfire mitigation plans on the utilities, along with a bunch of other things. But they also created this Commission on Catastrophic Wildfire that was to be housed at the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, It's a short-term project for 6 months, effectively, to pull together some experts across the state to look at ways to socialize the costs associated with these catastrophic wildfires that a utility started. Roughly 10% of the wildfires in the state are, or 10% or fewer of the wildfires in the state are associated with utilities, but they tend to be larger, more catastrophic because they're associated with large-scale wind events and they are in places that are more densely populated. And so this commission was supposed to look at, was intended to look at that intersection of liability and cost and how to manage those costs in a way that increased safety while also keeping our energy infrastructure safe and allowing us to pursue our state's clean energy goals. I'm proud to say that we put out a report at least 3 weeks before the deadline. We had a series of public meetings around the state. It was, at least in my mind, a really great space to have a public dialogue on this issue that had really been focused within the legislature the year before and through the discussions in the legislature. This really brought that dialogue out to the public. And the commission, after a series of public meetings, put together a set of recommendations on dealing with both the legal infrastructure around liability and funding associated with that liability regarding utilities and wildfires. The recommendations suggested a revision to the current implementation of inverse condemnation, which was the sort of. Do you want to explain it? Is everybody here familiar with inverse condemnation? I won't go into too much detail, but simply it's a constitutional provision that has basically held utilities liable for wildfires if their infrastructure is responsible for having started. And so revisions to the recommendations recommended revisions to that, in addition to creating a wildfire fund that would sort of pre-fund the liability that utilities face, so it reduces some of the shock to the utilities if there is a catastrophic wildfire. Had a series of other recommendations about how to deal with cost recovery. And then there was a whole section on insurance and wildfire insurance, because I think there's a recognition that there are increasing challenges with availability and affordability of insurance in California related to the wildfires, especially in the wildland urban interfaces. So they made a series of recommendations on that front as well that I'm happy to talk a little bit about if there are questions. That was submitted to the legislature, and then we saw that in addition to some work that happened within the governor's office, a report called the Strike Force Report, that were taken up into legislation. AB 1054 was passed earlier this year on urgency, on emergency legislation, and so it went into effect immediately, and that did a series of things to reduce wildfire risk associated with utilities, as well as creating this wildfire fund that sort of pre-funded some of the liabilities that the utilities face. I'm happy to go into some more detail there, but we can save it for question and answer.
Come back to that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Awesome. So it's coming to you next. So thank you for that overview. And Supervisor Veerkamp, El Dorado is one of the most heavily forested counties in our region. Also clearly, obviously, a part of the Sierra and all that that entails. You yourself have been a professional firefighter. I'd love to hear your thoughts on any aspect of what we've talked about, whether it's some of the fire reduction projects, whether it's some of the insurance issues, utility, financial exposure, et cetera, or just what it looks like from the ground in El Dorado County.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. Appreciate it. I guess, fortunately and luckily for myself, I'm a fifth-generation Northern California native, and our family settled in the Gold Hill area in 1852, and that's actually both sides of my family. And they were ranchers. They came for the gold and didn't take long to figure out that that wasn't going to work. Didn't pan out for them. So they got heavily into ranching, and ranching obviously managing the land. They had cattle, which they ranged in the high country in the summer times, and they drove them back and forth. And so they knew a lot about the land, and had opportunities, because my one grandfather lived to be 101. Asked him a lot about how they managed the land and the different things that they did for success in managing that land. So I'll come back to that in just a minute. Then I obviously grew up there, went to school, got in the fire service, spent 31 years, and retired as a fire chief in El Dorado Hills Fire Department. 6, 7, 8 years I was on a CAL FIRE incident command team, traveling in the state as well as out of state, managing major incidents. So a lot of experience, and I had a liaison officer role. You guys know that's where you try to fix or solve most problems that occur on one of these major incidents. So a lot of good opportunity there to interface with government and elected officials. As a board Supervisor, a SACOG, also board member, we sit on various committees and commissions, whether it's Water Agency, Air Resources Board, so a lot of opportunity to see it from a whole bunch of different perspectives. And with that fire service background, and you were just alluding to it on the utility side, we as a fire chiefs group always advocated for 2 ways in, 2 ways out. We advocated for utility companies clean their easements, and we lost politically time and time again. So guess what? I became one. Now I understand that piece of it, and it's not as simple as it seems. Although in the utility easement cleanup, we've got major transmission lines coming out of the American River project. We've got PG&E lines coming out of Chili Bar, and we started processes years ago before the campfire. We had the 95,000 acre. I'll get to it in a minute. King fires, excuse me, and various other fires. We've been very prone to having some major fires in El Dorado County, and again, all vegetation driven. Yes, we do have high winds and high humidities and so forth, but they are vegetation driven. I'm sorry, they are, and we've not done a good job in managing our lands. So I got the opportunity to testify before Congress here this spring. And my question to some of the congressional folks were, do you guys all know what the 2009 Flame Act is? And have you checked on the progress in your representative region? Most of them shook their head no, and they didn't have an understanding at all of what federal legislation that passed in 2009 and what it said to do. Fire safe communities, build cohesive strategies, and reduce the threat of wildfire in our forests. We all failed at all 3 of those because we've seen since 2009 catastrophic wildfire. Well, the problem with the 2009 Flame Act, it came unfunded. So the federal government Forest Service didn't have any teeth to really do anything other than this very nice fancy legislation that said they had to. We started that process with our Forest Service probably about 4 years ago. And so we formed very good, strong ties, cohesive strategy ties with all of our partners, as well as, and the ones that do have the money, are the foundations. So Mule Deer Foundation and this foundation, the Wild Turkey Foundation, Federation, we've been able to do more projects because they can get more funding than the federal government is allowing us to get. It doesn't make a lot of sense when this is something that is required. And just about 75% of our land in El Dorado County is federally owned land, publicly owned federal land. So I took that opportunity to tell the congressional folks, that there's a little bit of the tail wagging the dog here to need your help. So that was a great opportunity to do so. The other thing from our level is when I was fire chief in El Dorado Hills, actually it was prior to being fire chief, we took matters into our own hands and started what we call the vacant lot ordinance. If any of you live in El Dorado Hills, you know what that is. You have to comply. If not, we hire a contractor. After inspections and after noticing, they come in, clean the lot to our specifications, and guess where the bill goes? To your property tax. So there's models out there that work very well. The other thing that we did in all of our public hearings on our vegetation management program, which we've just now initiated, was ask people, do you know what 4291 is? They all shook their head no. That's state law. And it tells you what you're supposed to do on your own private land. So there's a big issue there, and we're working collaboratively with CAL FIRE to try to get more of that word out so people understand it. At a minimum, that's what you're supposed to do. And, you know, with CAL FIRE, much to their respect, they don't have the staffing, the manpower to carry that through to that next phase. It could get to a citation process. By the time they get done through fire season, though, that citation process works through, we take people to court, the judge says, what's the problem? It's raining. We don't have an issue. So, you know, we'll slap on the hand and away they go. That you just can't get things done that way. And again, it's not anything a slap at CAL FIRE whatsoever. They just never had, it's never been their major focus. Suppression is the focus. So El Dorado County's taken matters into our own hands, and we've initiated a mandatory vegetation management ordinance, a lot on the lines of El Dorado Hills and Cameron Park ordinances. So they were already in the county, and yet we went one step further and we crossed property lines. Because you could do 30 feet on your side, but you got 70, maybe 70, 80, or 90 feet on the other side, and that vacant landowner or property owner never has to do anything. So how do you fix the problem? Ours crosses property lines. It's a minimum of 100 feet from residential structures or any other structure that'll burn, and it's mandatory, and it takes off. It's already a soft start this year with outreach and education. And the best thing for El Dorado County is we've got 22 fire safe councils now, and there's 6 more, I think, in the works that looks like are going to come on board. So that outreach is much easier for us to do, and they're working hard to educate the public out there. As you all have mentioned, we get pushback, and it's unbelievable. Out of the same breath, the constituent will say, I can't get homeowners insurance, or it's costing me $10,000. And then they say, don't cut that brush or don't cut that tree. So in the public hearings that I've been out and participated in, I'm saying, sorry folks, you can't have it both ways. You can't serve two gods. My grandfather taught me years ago, because of the way they manage the land, they learned from the Native Americans. You manage it, it'll manage you. So a lot of stuff quick. I'll turn it back to you and take any questions that you may have. Thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate the insight. So I've got a couple of follow-up questions, and then we'll turn it over to everybody here. And I think we'll use the same highly sophisticated approach that Adrian did, which included standing up and shouting really loudly if you have a question, because we have only the one mic. But I would love to follow up on the point that you mentioned, Supervisor, about the extent of federal lands in El Dorado County and, of course, throughout the state, and ask, taking your example of the constructive relationship that you've built with the federal land managers, ask CAL FIRE if you could speak a little bit to what you're seeing in the relationship between state and federal land managers, whether it's in our region or elsewhere.
Yeah, thank you. This is Matthew Reischman. Yeah, no, we recognize that our federal cooperators play a huge role in forest management across California. And, you know, we were allocated, I think it's $200 million over the next 5 years to implement forest management and fire prevention projects across the state. 50% of those grants thus far have gone to federal cooperators. And so we're pretty heavily engaged at the state level with assisting our federal partners in managing our federal forests. We actually see them as California's forests. You know, despite wherever the responsibility lays, we're using whatever authorities we can to actively engage with our federal cooperators, whether it's Good Neighbor Authority, White Authority. These are authorities that we have the ability to go across jurisdictional boundaries in order to implement projects. What we're finding is that whether it's our staff, our resources, or Forest Service funds and their resources, using some of those authorities gives us the best opportunity to utilize the best tool for the job. So whether it's Forest Service hotshot crews falling trees and our crews going in and burning behind them, whatever it is, you know, we're actively engaged in those types of projects in order to ensure that we're getting work done. Now, that's not to say that you know, there's not a lot of work to do, but you know, we are making some pretty good progress there. We're in the process of pulling together, and I believe it'll be Governor Newsom signing with Randy Moore from Forest Service Region 5, what's called a shared stewardship agreement. And it's going to outline the roles and responsibilities that each agency will be taking, or that the state and the Forest Service will be taking in order to continue to work together in order to improve forest management across California. And it's everything from implementing fuel break work to building capacity, looking at alternative utilization of wood products, trying to stimulate local economies and really bringing back a robust and healthy industry to California, and finding new and innovative ways to use wood in ways that we haven't used it in the past. And not just talking about going out and cutting larger diameter trees, I'm talking about utilizing smaller diameter trees and brush and whatever we can, looking at cross-laminated timber opportunities. So we're really trying to look at new and innovative ways in order to stimulate some markets so that we can bring back an interest of getting out into the woods and doing this work. John mentioned earlier, there is a lack of resources out there, and folks aren't, young men and women aren't going into either the forestry or the timber harvesting profession these days. So we're trying to provide some opportunities in community colleges and other ways that we can to try to stimulate interest in that area. But I would say overall we have very good working relationship with our federal cooperators, and we're continuing to support them as they do us.
I would just add quickly and verify that all of that is occurring, and with partnerships such as with Valley Vision, we're working with our local colleges to try to backfill those needs and the lost technique and art of logging and brush clearing, because of very limited contractors. A lot of them sold their trucks and left. So that is a challenge, but it's being met. And then the other challenge is going to be, what are we going to do with all this stuff? You mentioned it. So those things are all in the works, but I think we got to do better with some potential biomass facilities and some other things, because there is a lot of product out there that's going to be coming out, and we can't just burn it all. Obviously, that's one tool in the toolbox, but we have to use every strategy we can come up with, and people like relationships with SACOGs and others, we can do that. And we've probably got a list in El Dorado County of our cohesive strategy group of 20 plus projects that are all in various stages of working that never would have happened, and we won't do it alone. We've got to do it collaboratively, and we're making a lot of progress there. We've got a lot of work to do.
John, you want to?
Yeah, I think when I came and spoke with this group before, I mentioned that there's a lot of funding, and we're spending a lot of money, and we're getting a lot of work done, both through grants and the 35 projects and other ways. But can we continue to spend $200 million a year for the foreseeable future for this? And that's where the whole commercialization comes in. We have to find intelligent ways to use the products that are generated so that it can pay for itself, or at least partially pay for itself. We have forests in California that are not in a healthy natural condition. And we need to get back closer to that healthy natural condition. And that's really what all these projects are looking to do. And as far as El Dorado County, 75% federal. Statewide, it's about 57%. So if we don't have good partnerships with our federal counterparts, I mean, we can get the state responsibility area and the local responsibility area lands all buttoned up and looking great. But the other 57% is also important. And we can't look at it as a boundary, because those lands belong to everybody and they border our communities. And so we have to do that work. And that's me as a forester speaking. Just thinking about it broadly, not me as a CAL FIRE employee. And I think that we at CAL FIRE are really turning in the right direction with our increased pace and scale of vegetation management and prescribed fire, forest management, healthy forests. The grant programs run from fire prevention grants, which are what we've been talking about, and we have our healthy forest grants, which are more, they're not necessarily the places that are right in our communities. They're getting forests further out into a healthier state. It's different types of projects. And it takes that continuum of management all the way from our local responsibility areas in our cities and our wildland urban interface all the way out into the desolation wilderness where there's very little management, and probably will always be very little management. And so that's the kind of effort we're talking about, and that's throughout the state, not even just the Sierras.
So I do have one additional question, but I'm thinking about the time and making sure that we've got time for audience questions, and maybe we'll start that with Bill.
Sure, I was just really curious and struck by the dramatic difference in the amount of acreage that was burned in 2018 versus this year. And I take the occasion to ask as many people as I can, and you're the expert, you're probably the closest to it. What accounts for the difference? I've heard, we had late rains, and I've also heard that we've mobilized in a much different way. If you were to say, what are the top 2 or 3 reasons why we've been able to cut the amount of burned acreage this year so significantly, what would you pinpoint?
So I guess I would say initially, every year the fuels get into a condition where we can have catastrophic fire behavior. That's just the nature of California. Fuels get, especially the live fuel moistures, get so low, and when we get the relative humidities, down in the single digits, the potential for catastrophic fire is significant. But this year we've had the red flag warnings, we've had some wind, but we just haven't had the sustained 70, 80 mile an hour winds over those 2 and 3 days. Some areas of the state we have, but we haven't had it at the magnitude that we've had in years past. So I think that's part of it. The other one is we've received some additional resources. We've ramped up our staffing this year a little bit. The governor's provided us with some additional fire suppression resources, some additional aircraft, and so I think our fire suppression response is part of it. The other thing is for probably the past 5 years, it seems like every year we're saying this is the worst fire season ever. It's the worst fire. We get the new normal, whatever you want to call it. Now we just call it fire season again. I think folks are starting to get used to the difference in fire behavior that we're seeing out there. And so we understand that, when we're going into areas where we're going to see, running crown fire pushed by a 70 mile an hour wind, we're getting a little bit more knowledge in that type of fire behavior. I think that's helping. But I would say altogether, it's the weather that we're seeing and the response that we're having. So,
can I ask also a follow-up question just very quickly? You might be able to answer both. So what about what's next? We keep hearing that the fire season shoulder, that used to be September, October, is now it's 12-month fire season. What can we expect next? Is there a danger lurking around the corner for 2019 that everything is going to go up? Or I've heard in Alpine County, for example, that they're already sort of downstepping their level of risk because they believe that they're literally out of the woods, that the fire risk there is going down. What's the real story?
Well, I think that the real story varies from place to place a little bit. Also, it varies with time. I mean, you're talking about systems that are very dynamic. So we had 2017 and 2018, which were both extreme fire seasons, post-drought, but now we've had 2 of the last 3 years be very wet. And so that's part of what we're seeing in the mix too, is vegetation in a somewhat healthier state. Couple that with a narrower window, because we had some late season rain, we had snow on the ground at the higher elevations into the summer, and then pair that as well. I mean, if we get some good, as Matthew said earlier, if we get good wetting rain in early October, we might be done for the year. If we don't, it's wait and see what happens with wind. I mean, that's really the story. Any year could be the worst fire year ever. It just really depends on the conditions when the time is right. And so, as far as remind me of your other question, what's next?
Yeah.
That's what's next. Wait and see what happens this fall. I mean, I wish I had a better answer for you, but I think we can expect as time goes on, we're going to see more years like 17 and 18, and probably more frequently than we have in the past, just with the changing climate. And the hope is, by doing all these other things that we're all doing, that we can mitigate some of that, and we will see a return to a more normal fire regime.
Thanks, John. You actually just, it's good transition into what I was thinking of on this, which is that, the historical precedent seems to no longer tell us much about what's coming in the future, which is unfortunate. We've always been able to rely on what the past 20 years look like, and how do we translate that into what this year and next year is going to look like. And that that relationship is much more attenuated than it was before the shifting climate, as well as development patterns in California, and extension of where we live and how we live in the state. And so, one thing, for me, one of the things that's a takeaway here is that we need to build resilience to these larger fires into our systems, and that's the utilities and the way they operate, that's the insurance industry, the way it operates, and what it anticipates coming down the road, and that's homeowners who homeowners and communities who need to build mitigation into the work they do around their house and in their communities and how they design those communities. So it's just amping up the level of forward-looking resilience we build into everything we do seems necessary because we don't have a great sense of what next year is going to look like, and we know that it could be worse, and we hope obviously that it's not going to be. We know that it could be worse than it has been historically because we've seen those peak years 2 years in a row. So
Two quick statements. You don't want a good laugh, tell God your plans. To counter that though, if it's predictable, it's most likely preventable. And that resiliency is, we're way behind that power curve, and that's what has to change. We can't afford suppression at its modern day cost. We have to work on the prevention side, and that's going to take time, but ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. There's a lot of little isms that fit here, and that's what we've got to work on and emphasize. And it really starts with the individual homeowner, because if they all take care of themselves, government doesn't have to step in to do much. We can put the fire out, and they're very good at it. 95% of the time, 5 acres or less, and it happens. But when you get catastrophic conditions with all that vegetation, recipe for disaster, proven time and time again.
Grace, and then I can just speak. It seems like there's a lot of capacity that's needed to get this job done, and I see a lot of workforce development opportunities. And I'm wondering if you guys can speak to if there are any programs that exist, and if they don't exist, are they in formation to provide opportunities for people who were previously incarcerated to do some of these jobs?
Yeah, so we have a couple different programs. Our crews, our fire crews that we use are inmate crews. You might be aware of that. And so we have a relationship with the California Department of Corrections. And so those folks, as they're, as in the camps, our captains will pick them up and take them out. So there's a certain amount of training that goes on there. And so the opportunity for them when they come out is pretty good, that they can apply just like anyone else. But they have that experience and training in their background. We also have a relationship with the camp down south where we're doing just that. We're taking some of our inmates and trying to facilitate them into some of the positions that we have on our fire crews. So there are some opportunities. There's our crew count is down right now, and so we're actually establishing relationships with California Department of Correction or California Conservation crew, and using some of the younger youth and educating them, giving them some opportunities. And one of the things we've done recently with our fuels crews, we just got 10 additional fuels crews that are specifically focusing on prescribed fire and fuel reduction. We changed the minimum qualification so that if you've done some work with the California Conservation crew, you automatically qualify to come over and crosswalk in to work on one of our crews. So we're really looking at how we can recruit young men and women into the department, and not just bringing them in and putting them on a fire engine, but bringing them in and educating them in vegetation management and some forestry work in order to improve the depth that we have in forest management in our department, in hopes that they'll come up through the ranks and hopefully become the leaders of our department in the future.
And I do think Matthew mentioned earlier that there are some efforts out there to start creating some community college programs to kind of expedite the process for some folks. And what you can do to help us with all of that is just if you have interaction with youth, talk to them about this as a possible career opportunity. These are good paying jobs with career ladders that they can have a very good long career doing this kind of work. And they can go many different directions with it. They can migrate into our firefighting side, they can migrate into our resource management side and become foresters if they choose to. There's a number of opportunities there, and they can use it to navigate into other parts and other sectors as well.
Where's the front door for that? If we were to turn on people, where's the front door to tell them to go?
So the fuels reduction crews, those are forestry technician jobs. There's a lot of them, and there's a fairly high turnover rate with those jobs because they move on to other things in the department. But it's 6 months of essentially 6 months of qualified experience is all it takes.
So Bill, we talked to you.
Or an equivalent amount of education.
Yeah, we talked to you the other day with your staff.
Right.
And they'll run a high school alumni, natural resources program.
Yeah.
So we're starting to build those things back into those type of things. So everybody's not going to college.
Right.
And these kids want to go to work. Perfect opportunity for them to learn one heck of a trade, which used to be very prevalent in Dorado and some of these rural counties. So
Yeah.
we're doing that, as well as then we opened that door for Los Rios and some of the other local college districts as well, 2-year degree certificate program, heavy equipment operator or whatever with a smarter machinery that could be a lot better than we used to do it for us.
Thank you. Wait, question in the back. Yes, ma'am.
Should I shout? I will.
If you can.
I have a loud voice, I think. At least I'm told that. Anyway, I'm coming at this from a little different angle as a public member, concerned about climate change. And I haven't heard anyone talk about that today. So I'd like to zero in on that a little bit. When you do what methods are used for fire prevention that don't include more fire? I don't understand it, so I'd like you to explain it a little bit. What do you do with the brush? What do you do? And I'm sure you get backlash on taking trees down. I'm positive about that. So how do you manage this kind of thing without creating more problems in air quality problems?
Well, to be frank, there's never been a scenario in California without fire. It's a matter of what kind of fire and how severe the fire is. And as far as the messaging is around how do we get our forests back into a condition that we can more readily live with. And that's what the focus is. The focus isn't to generate revenue, the focus isn't to take down large trees, but we also can't have a situation where we have forests that are stocked at 400 to 500 trees per acre, where the pre-European settlement condition of our forests were anywhere from 50 to 200 trees per acre on average, depending on where in the state you are. And
there has to be a balance, and I'm interested in hearing what your methods are.
And we can't do that broadly statewide because it's not the same statewide. It's different from place to place. And so we have to, that's why we have foresters in our ranks. That's why we use resource professionals to do this kind of work. Foresters, biologists, archaeologists, for all the various concerns. And that's why we work with our sister agencies.
And so when we talk about fire prevention and you're asking about methods and methodology, we're not just talking about brush and fire. Our programs, most of our programs, even our fire suppression folks are out doing defensible space inspections, but it's the engineering, it's the structural hardening, it's the land use planning, it's the outreach and education. It's everything that we do to reach out to homeowners and the landowners. It's all of our forestry landowner assistance programs. Working with landowners, CAL FIRE doesn't manage properties directly. We have about 70,000 acres in our state forest program. Other than that, we're assisting private landowners, helping them meet their objectives. And so the whole slew of work that we do outside of fire suppression and using prescribed fire or cutting brush is geared towards educating landowners on how to be more fire safe.
With or without climate change, there's a more balanced approach today than there's ever been. And it's been driven by all of these factors that now are in our way or there for us to deal with. We use our master gardeners to talk people how to do fire resilient landscaping. So, and when we put the ordinance into place, obviously people came and said, well, does that mean I got to cut everything down in that 100 feet? Absolutely not. It's managing the space, it's managing the height, and it's keeping the fire on the ground so they can come put it out. And believe me, in these forests, back in the forest setting, These forests look better, they're healthier, better for wildlife, because the way they are now, it's not working. And then we nuke it in 95,000 acre Cape Fire. There's still not a return of any of the amphibians in the Rubicon River drainage that there was prior to the fire. So do we want that? I don't think so.
I think maybe one time for one more question, Adrian?
Yeah, it's quick.
It's quick.
It's quick.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm an architect plan, with the AIA and the living communities. And there's two-way in and two-way out needs to intersect with new projects, because there's two projects in Davis that only have one way in and out. And then I want to tag that to the city of Sacramento, which happens to be the capital for the entire state of California. And we would not be able to evacuate because of an outdated, dysfunctional freeway system that has to change. And I would like to see that happen. And one other thing is that it would be good to learn from the timber barons up in the Northwest, because I've heard that they used the people killed wood. Yeah, that's within the first 5 years. And so they've also been active in developing the CLT and some other things.
Right.
That has occurred in California as well, just not to the magnitude because we don't have the infrastructure. There used to be over 250 sawmills in the state, and now there's 30. So, I mean, when you have something like that serious of a beetle kill, there's no way that the existing sawmills can handle all that. Some of it got used, some of it got shipped overseas. That's certainly not optimal either from a climate change standpoint. But better to use it than to not use it to a degree, right? So we need to be intelligent about how we look at that infrastructure. So we're not talking about building the sawmills of the past that only use large logs, as Matthew alluded to. We're talking about all different ways to use all different kinds of material. So it could be chips from brush in some cases. It could be chips from small trees. It could be small trees used to their best extent as lumber. I mean, there's a number of options. We have to be intelligent about how we look at infrastructure to be able to handle these types of ups and downs in the future.
And am I correct that the state worked last year on the wood, I'm not going to get the name right, but the Wood Products Task Force, whatever it actually is called, has it now been moved into the Forest Management Task Force as a piece of that work?
Yes. There was a wood products utilization group within the Stream Mortality Task Force that was set up to look at ways to build out the infrastructure associated with utilizing the beetle-killed wood. As you said, there is use for it. Other states are using it. Colorado has been through this for a couple of decades now, and they've found ways to use it through pelletizing it into fuel. In California, it was, as John indicated, it was getting exported. A lot of it was getting exported to actually China to make formboards for concrete, which is not ideal. You don't want it to go abroad because it's transportation emissions, but it also uses it and it replaces virgin timber that was being used otherwise. So I guess the point is that there are a lot of ways to use this, and the solution to that becomes a systemic solution. It's not just how do we build one facility, it's how do you build the infrastructure to have a right-sized industry that can use some of this material that isn't the infrastructure of the past, but is able to use the smaller damaged material and keep the treatment that needs to happen, have an economic incentive to have that treatment happen, so that it's not the state always paying for it.
And I think we are pretty much out of time. So I would like to thank all four of you very much for the discussion this afternoon. And I guess, feel free to sit back down. I guess I'll turn it back over to Adrian.
All right. Thank you to our speakers. I know, I want to respect everyone's time. We have like 2 minutes left-ish. So Bill Mueller, my CEO at Valley Vision, I think he has about a minute to just give a brief update on some new work that we're going to be starting to do very shortly.
So good afternoon, everyone.
Just wanted to make sure that we made you aware that Valley Vision is now working very closely with Governor Newsom's office. You may know that there was an emergency statute that was passed earlier this year that was focused on the fact that in the experience of the Carr Fire and so many other wildfires that we've had, that often it's the disadvantaged communities that are hurt the most. And so the state of California, together with the legislature, passed legislation AB 72, setting aside $50 million to do outreach to 1 million underserved and disadvantaged Californians up and down the state, from Siskiyou, and Butte, where there's tremendous social isolation, to places in San Francisco and LA that are threatened by earthquake as well as sea level rise and other things. And those communities are often very much lacking the resources and often are cut out of communication because they're isolated and sometimes hard to reach. So Valley Vision is working directly with the governor's office and 24 community benefit organizations with CAL FIRE and a host of other organizations that are at the table helping us do that outreach across California. We're excited about this new work. It's brand new work, not only to us, but to the state of California. These are very hard to reach populations, and so we're working with community-based organizations that are very small, very much enmeshed in the communities to do outreach to them about the resources that are already available, but they may not be aware of. The program that the governor has announced is called Listos California. Listos in Spanish is ready, and it really sort of focuses on the vast majority of folks who are not Anglo, but instead Latino and African American and so many other sort of diverse populations that are here in California. We encourage you to check out the listoscalifornia.org website for a little bit of information, but we hope to be in touch with you a little bit more about that program. This is one of those things where we want to do even more outreach and looking at our state partners. This is new work to us, and our real job is to really connect with people that haven't been connected with about how they can prepare themselves, their families, their small businesses, and their communities. So thank you for the opportunity.
With that, we are done. So thanks so much for coming to the third Mayor Partnership Luncheon. See you next week. Try to get out of it. You gotta drive that
Look at all those ready ones. I don't know who that is, but there it is. Yeah, we'll talk later.
Thank you so much. Do you have any other site plans? Oh, okay. I just wanted to make sure we weren't being disrespectful and just throwing away our cans.
Yeah, no, I know. I like this class. Unfortunately, I failed to sell it. I'm sorry about it.
No problem.
How did everything go? I assume everything went great.
Everything went well. I think people kept forgetting to.
Yeah, you did
really
talk.
cool.
Yeah.
But otherwise, you hope like that's not on you guys. It's up communicating. So thank you so much for setting this up.
You're welcome. Yeah, don't mind me. I'm just doing a little cleaning up because I'm leaving a little bit early today. So I'm just getting a head start on things.
Yeah,
so,
I won't mind you. No, thank you very much.
Did that really answer your question? We're doing all those cats line are up.
Thank you, sir. And we realized.
Everything went great. Yeah, I know. I'm happy. Yeah, don't mind me just doing a little cleanup. I'm just like doing some of the table breakdowns and stuff. I'm out here a little bit early today.
Hey, it's Labor Day weekend.
Yeah. Well, I mean, not only that, but also I have to get this room set up for next week. So. Yeah. Did everything? I mean, I assume everything went fine.
Everything went great.